I
like that analogy of the pizza, of the rolling it out. That's good. I'm gonna think about that next time I try to like put an effect on something.
Yeah, right.
Totally. Tell me a bit about how you find artists or how they find you. How does work come through your door?
I have been the luckiest character. I've spent 13 years thinking that the next 3 months was going to be the last 3 months that I would ever work. I have little to no idea how it's all kept going, other than there's a blue collar mentality to the way that I approach things as far as my work. I set deadlines that I'm supposed to work on. I try to nurture relationships that I have. I always feel like the last gig that I have is going to be the most important gig. And I have, with the exception of a couple of limited spells, have never had management. And it's been word of mouth. I don't really A&R anything. I don't really go out and try to find stuff. The best billboard is the artist that you work with who is at a festival or on a phone call or, posting something on social media that gives you a bit of a mention and talks about the relationship they had with you. And I think artists trust artists.
Yeah,
so
totally.
That's how that's gone. Yeah, I've been very, very lucky.
That's awesome. Well, you mentioned that you're part of this important scene, or this new up and coming scene, the Kentucky scene. Would you mind telling the audience a little bit about that? What's it about? What's happening in Lexington?
Yeah, the Kentucky thing has always been, for decades, it's always been at the forefront of Appalachian or bluegrass roots music, country music, if you will, which is ironic because never listened to any of it growing up. And as an Ohio boy, I was, my idea of an Americana album might have been like Zeppelin 3 or Exile on Main
British.
Street. Yeah, I'm British. And then I ended up here and I fell in love with the roots side of things, which to me resembled a lot of like what classic rock was. And so I would say the first 5-7 years of working, it was considered somewhat, out of style to work in that realm, more or less country. You certainly never mentioned that word. And so I worked with a lot of bands from Brooklyn, a lot of bands from, Silver Lake and Chicago. And I was very fortunate to have that experiences. And then all of a sudden I found myself in the midst of a bit of a resurgence of the roots scene, of the Americana scene that Waylon and Willie and John Prine and Dylan and Emmylou had created, Dolly. And so I worked with a band called Sunday Valley, who had an artist by the name of Sturgill Simpson, who's gone on to have a great career, and another individual named Joe Pug, who has Joe Pug's got a great...
I really liked his music. I was listening to that before the call. Yeah, very nice.
An artist by the name of Ben So Lee, who's a cello player. All of this, without knowing, ended up sort of having some wheels to it. It had some tread on the tires. And Nashville started to pay a little bit of attention, I think, to what was happening outside of the city limits of what they were doing down there. Mm-hmm. And I think that the audience started to really have an affection for these people that were telling the same stories that they were living. And that style of music it was a little bit of a canvas that I thought that you didn't always take the picture, but you could actually sort of work within that a little bit. I was heavily influenced by Time Out of Mind and Wrecking Ball that Dan Lanois had done. I thought, isn't that interesting that a guy like that could take something so organic and so rooted in tradition, yet add a flair to it. I'm
gonna have to educate myself on this stuff because I don't know all these things.
Well, I was a big U2 fan. And what I found was that the same guy that was working with U2 and Peter Gabriel was all of a sudden working with Emmylou Harris and Willie Nelson and Bob Dylan. And you started to realize that this little world, this little niche of the world that I was living in the style of music had this sort of global, sonic element to it. And once again, it was that human factor. I just love watching people play, and I love setting up, an atmosphere and a vibe in which people sort of feel comfortable, and then ruining their stuff.
Well, speaking of like setting up the vibe, getting an atmosphere, talk about your approach to working on a song. Let's say an artist comes to you with a song. What's the first thing you usually do?
I'm not a big pre-production guy. I find the more that I do pre-production, the more I get sort of stuck in the muck a little bit.
Yeah.
So I listen to things. I sort of find a approach that I feel like will nurture and make the artist comfortable. My studio, which might be somewhat of interest as far as is definitely a part of my methodology. I don't have a traditional recording studio. I move all the time. I spend a couple years somewhere. I pick weird, interesting places to exist, and or I mobily record. And I think that the vibe is a big part of it. Like acoustic treatments, I've got hundreds of yards of material and, baffles and whatnot. So they become my studio. And so I try to set up a place that the artist is not intimidated by. I've spent a lot of time in the dentist chair over the course of the last 15 years. I was born with soft teeth. And sometimes going into studios always felt like I was going to the dentist office. And I really wanted to avoid that,
Right. You don't want to feel like you're being like you're an exhibit or something. And
exactly. So, and once again, it all goes back to those artists that I was, really into. A lot of it was made in castles or
right, like Zeppelin 4. Sure.
Yeah. So
totally.
That's one of the ways I prepare to work with an artist is really setting up the vibe. And I do my pre-production, outside of listening and sort of, making some quick notes, is I set up before the artist gets in. Whether it's a band or it's a solo artist or it's something that I'm producing where I'm bringing in the players, I like them to come in at a reasonable time and know that they're going to have to do nothing at all other than be nurtured. And so, whether it's the candles are lit and the microphones are set up and the workstation is there for them. We've got the right food and the right, elements of inspiration so that we can really concentrate. And it's not going to be a long day. I'm not your 14-hour guy. I don't really judge my, work ethic with the amount of time that I put on something. And you'll go in 8 hours, have a very concentrated, focused time, not belabor the point. If something's not working, we'll move on. You can always revisit things. I take a lot of pictures and notes that don't end up on social media that document the things that, the atmosphere and the settings and so on and so forth. So we can revisit that stuff. But everything's about the level of comfort for the artist.
Wow, that's so cool. I love that approach. Even like the food. Like I would never have thought about, when I'm working with an artist, right? Like we're, if we're doing a whole day together, we'll get lunch, we'll go somewhere or order in or whatever. We'll make coffee together. Mm-hmm. I'm big on making coffee with the artists that come here, but food, that's like a whole other level,
I sort of feel like that there's a bubble or something. I feel like there's a concentrated bubble around the thing, and I don't want it to be permeated too much. And that could be selfish on my behalf because when I'm working, I like to work. And when I'm not working, I don't want to work. That idea of we're going to go out for 2 or 3 hours, we're going to come back and we're going to do this and then we're going to do that. For some reason, I have a very focused stretch of time. Probably goes back to what my parents were trying to figure out. It sounds like a
spa. It's like, you know what I mean?
Right,
it's like you're like going into this zone. Let's do this day, It's like, and I love your attentiveness. It's like very... we tend to be therapists also, and people skills and that kind of thing is super important. So it sounds like you're doing that. You're doing justice on that.
Trying. Yes, thanks.
You're trying.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. Tell me a little bit more about production. Like, I don't know, anything else that you do that you think is specifically unique to you? Any tried and true techniques that you find yourself coming back to?
Yeah. My production is relatively based on texture. I have the great privilege of working with some amazing songwriters. So the arrangement side of things somewhat organically comes about. If something feels too long in the tooth or not expressed enough or not emotional enough, we'll click in to trying to figure out how to emote and how to sort of get in what you were calling sort of the therapeutic mode. As a producer, I do have eccentricities. I think one of the important things about production is I'm a mixer, so I mix all the productions that I do for the most part, and have the great privilege of, mixing. Probably about 50% of my revenue comes from stuff that I don't work on, which during periods like COVID was
totally
a real godsend.
That's amazing.
I try to use the assets that I have in front of me, the skills that I bring to the table, the atmosphere that I'm in, and most importantly, the artist, what they bring, and really try to exploit and make bold decisions with that. So I don't like to overtrack. The idea of searching through 75 tracks of something is just it's just beyond my comprehension as far as my ability to attain that much information.
I know when I overtrack, I just get overwhelmed by the process of like needing to edit it and like figure out what I need to keep. And that just delays things, right? Like, cause then you start to procrastinate that. Yeah.
Production and mixing and playing guitar or an instrument is the exact same for me. I don't want to restring my guitar on stage. That's something that should be done before. I want to react to it as it's happening. And so I think the thing that might be semi-unique to my element of production is that amount of preparation that goes into it. And I love texture. I love sound. Every room I go into, I wonder what it would be like to record there. I mean, it's totally geeky and dorky, and that's exactly the way I am. And I like manipulating sound and doing it in a way that I would like to think benefits the big picture. I don't get caught in the woods of trying to make every guitar the best sounding guitar ever, the best snare drum ever, being too precious with anything. I try to make bold decisions on the fly, and knowing that I have to mix it, which may happen weeks or months later. I may not be in that same sort of headspace. So when I revisit, my old friend, the song, the track, I'd like to think that I've already made a lot of decisions previously that I can just sort of carry forth with. So
totally.
I guess that's probably, the thing that I look at myself as a producer and try and hold myself accountable for. Yeah,
I love that. So are you kind of like already pre-mixing on the go, or are you like committing, printing things? And also, do you end up mixing in that same project, or are you exporting it into a new session? Like, how does that transition from production?
I wish mixing? I didn't. That's a great question, and that's a philosophy that two really good friends of mine who do some work for me. Mm-hmm. I have philosophical discussions with them all the time that I'm always going to make that move to exporting all this stuff out and starting fresh, and I have been so full of it to say I'm going to do that for like 5 years, and I never do. I do pick up and go. I print things. I have my tape echoes and my Echo Rex and my random BS that floats around the studio, my pedals, my filters, and all these crazy things that I try to sort of use as opposed to going immediately in the box and doing. And I print those things, and I keep them in a state to when I revisit them, I sort of know I can pick up and go. And that really is how I do that. I'm much harder on the other producers and engineers who send me stuff, because when I mix, I want to just hit it and go. I don't want to have to think. I don't want to crossfade anything. I don't want to do that stuff. So I do tend to, as a mixer-producer relationship with myself, start where I left off. And I am a pretty good note taker. I mean,
you start talking about documenting and taking photos.
My mother would be proud of that, But
I think that's cool. I I should like take more time and like just kind of like be there. I feel like you're super present when you're in a session and just like, oh, this is cool. Let me write down what we did here and like there's something nice about that. I'm like always like hustling, I'm like the New York neurotic Jew, like let's go, let's